5 years and still going strong. How does a Minecraft empire last so long that it's dabbing on the rotting grave of the Confederacy? It's a story of conquest, hatred, reforms, a destiny-making rap battle, and a lot of maps. This is Yimmu Audal on play.stoneworks.gg. Yimmu Audal was born in one of our first worlds, Jagdis. It grew as an empire of islands around Spawn in the center of the world. Its founder's story studio is said to have found an ancient language carved on a birch tree to settle here, and built a lighthouse to capture the attention of new players venturing out from Spawn. Yimmu Audal grew as a powerhouse involved in all the big events and conflicts of Jagdis, elevating the chief diplomat Blue Marble as its second emperor, and developing its national traditions, Mesopotamian architecture, its ancient conlang, and the golden seabird religion Hukar Sharud. Dope world building. Harbarder was elevated as the next emperor, but the next day, the world of Jagdis corrupted, and its population fled through Blue Marble's portals to the new world of Rathnir. Here they settled the deserts of the central continent. They attempted to build artificial islands to recreate Jagdatian Yimmu Audal, but they ended up expanding their mainland desert outpost into the city of Ernu Arak, meaning New Hill. They expanded out over the lands, but they bumped up against the rising empire of Asharia, and fought a war over an Audalad netherite set lost in one of Asharia's wars. Yeah, early Rathnir was a lot like your friend's multiplayer server that explodes when the diamonds get stolen. With the decline of the first global hegemon called VIR, Yimmu Audal rose to take its place, most notably sending the players Delatra and Ghastly Bespoke to found a mining colony in the western gold-rich Mesa. While other Rathnirian nations went to war for the gold because it backed the world's currency, YA's side remained fine, and Delatra even rose to the Empressship. But her reign was turbulent due to pervasive banditry, intervention by foreign powers, and a socialist uprising from their northern Enoshve region. Delatra was pressured into abdicating, but their ancient crown was stolen and hidden away, which opened the Asharian emperor to march on the capital and proclaim himself emperor of Yimmu Audal too. YA's regency council, which would usually choose the emperor, wanted to elevate chief diplomat Grey Izyes to the emperorship, but the usurping Asharian emperor did everything he could to call that legitimacy into question. Delatra meanwhile committed self-death in humiliation, and soon was elected the Mad Empress Carpicius, who was being influenced by a demonic chaos goddess called Entropy. She escalated this instability into a world war, which I've made a favorite hour-long series on. But long story short, the Trillium War ended with YA's coalition defeated at the Battle of Ernu Arak and Carpicius's execution. So the empire tenuously stayed in Asharia's hands for a while, until the Asharian leadership ritually sacrificed themselves and their empire to the god Solaris, and the region was balkanized into Yimmu Audal, Theonikos, and Talor. YA by this time had become depopulated by the war, a month of occupation, and frankly disinterest as its remaining players became elitist and unchanging, whereas the Theonikos region had actively reformed with exciting ideas and aggressively recruited new players. So at the Conference of Ernu Arak, and under the influence of earlier emperors Story Studio and Harbarder, they united into the theocracy of Theos Esukdal, with the capital Ernu Arak retaining religious freedom privileges. The leading Lugal of Theos Esukdal, player Mechanical Hands, built the state up around the Theos-worshipping clergy, and with the booming population efforts, plus a general sense in the server that these old and big empires were really secure and important, Theos Esukdal grew to be one of the server's most dominant states. And after Mechanical Hands' prosperous reign, he was succeeded by Mystic Crafter. Mystic teamed up with the other world powers to help defeat Entropy when she returned to destroy the world, shout out Redfire Rex and his Entropy series, and later reformed the state to disconnect its leadership from the church, extending religious freedom to everyone. Mystic also elevated YA's old elites and reasserted their cultural prominence. Eventually, she felt that the clergy's rule had degraded, so she reformed the state as the Kingdom of Yimmu Audal under the Hukar Sharud religion, but kept many Theos Esukdal influences, even keeping the title of Ningal. As Rathnir's aristocracies developed more international social groups, its Audalad dynasty formed branches that implanted into some of its neighboring states. Mystic Crafter teamed up with the powerful leaders of Viadoxa and the new iteration of Asharia, and united into the triumvirate of Denumane. While big and scary looking on the map, having 3 completely different empires working as one is difficult. So after only about a month, the empire collapsed due due to competing interests. Viadoxa had lost a war for one of its colonies in the neighboring world, and Asharia was supporting Viadoxia's anti-colonial enemies. Afterwards, YA tried again with just Asharia, but this union ended up even worse. But let's take a moment for context to talk about Mystic Crafter's reign. She was in power for a long 6 months before uniting with Denimane, and even though she was controversial with the Theos Asukdal players, she clearly was quite successful in rejuvenating Yimmu Audal, because the next generation of YA's leaders were adopted and integrated under her direction, and many are still active and influential to this day. Under her, YA did not have any wars on its soil, only sending troops to help allies and deal with normal rambunctious squatters on its land. But 6 months is a long and intense time to run a Minecraft nation on play.stoneworks.gg. By the time Denimane came around, she was exhausted and less responsive to the Empire's problems. So being in league with these other leaders would afford her some time and stability. Mystic and the YA leaders could not find a sufficient heir to the throne at this time, and then a natural disaster struck in real life that took her out of the game. She was absent and without a successor, leaving internal issues and personal grievances to build up without a state response. This was a large contributing factor to YA's decline into a kind of century of humiliation. After unifying with Asharia via Mystic's marriage with their emperor, tensions started rising with their southwestern neighbor, Aldavir. Aldavir laid claim to the Fusinian borderlands, saying that they had once owned it and its players practiced their religion of sacralism. The YA players accused them of just making shit up. So, Aldavir conspired with a group of YA nobles to pull the Empire away from Asharia and towards Aldavir to oust Mystic Crafter from power and replace her with the YA noble Ghastly Bespoke and the Aldaviri noble Kerplus. They started by writing a list of demands that they intended to publish to put pressure on her, but they approached the wrong guy with the conspiracy, Sir Centurion, who was still loyal to Mystic Crafter. He told her and the plot was exposed. Ghastly Bespoke laid out everything to Mystic, including Asharia's early intention to hand the borderlands over to Aldavir to maintain peace, a direct stab in the back by the nation they had unified with. Mystic recognized how much instability her absence in leadership was causing, so she then decided to step down, but appointed the inexperienced Sir Centurion as emperor, and one of his first acts was to end their union with Asharia. But times of big change often give rise to more instability, because everyone with unaddressed problems in Yimmu Audal felt now was the time to act on them. First, the Edan Redu tribe was beefing with their neighboring town over its borders, until Sir Centurion marched on the town and encased their base in obsidian. There were also border conflicts with Asharia that he had to settle, and Bardonia threatened YA with war if they didn't give them half of the Coltmare island chain between them. He was clearly busy, so he acquiesced. Then the player Joe Frank Kennedy requested to be made a Duke of the Fusinian borderlands with Aldavir. Now, Joe Frank Kennedy had just recently made his town here. He and his citizens were Aldaviri citizens, and Fusinia was the large border region that Aldavir already wanted. The Emperor said no, and they rebelled, establishing squatter outposts all along the region to destabilize the Empire. Aldavir immediately backed them and demanded YA give Fusinia independence. This was just an Aldavir proxy operation. Aldavir and Yimmu Audal battled in these contested borderlands, with Aldavir raiding a boxing match, YA's Fort Void, and other towns across the border. Eventually, two armies met on the battlefield near Praestinia, and instead of fighting a devastating battle to settle the conflict, they each sent out their champions for a rap battle. Nihiliz for Aldavir and Foxmonk for YA. I was there, and it was great.
Send you back across the border, back to Yimmu Audal, man. Yeah, you lost. Wow. And you had enchanted armor. What do we have? A sword, no armor, and we still beat all y'all.
Aldavir won the rap battle, and soon after, things calmed down and entered peace negotiations. While this was happening, Sir Centurion had to step away for real-life issues, so the players Foxmonk and Marshal Yazov took over. Together, they created the Act of Union, which integrated Yimmu Audal and Aldavir together under one banner. In the Brothers' War, as we call it today, Aldavir had won. Okay, when I talk about wars and conflicts on play.stoneworks.gg, they're always devastating battles that leave behind depopulated war zones. Why was the Brothers' War over the fate of this whole central continent any different, only consisting of small-scale raids and funny boxing matches and rap battles? Well, Aldavir's regional overlords exercised a surprising amount of foresight. Aldavir was a region of overlordships where the state was run on a consensus basis, and the emperor could veto a decision if he had a really good reason. The majority of Aldavir's overlords wanted war with YA for diverse reasons, regarding land and YA's relationship with their Asharian rivals, whereas others did not want war. The overlords in Lapidovir and Lurgal argued that a destructive death war would make Yimmu Audal's players quit the server, leaving them with a useless, empty desert to rule over. That argument kept the war from escalating too much, leading to an absolutely incredible conflict that I love so much, and a real force of Rathnir's geopolitics, the Empire of Astaleia. Over the next couple months, Astaleia was a true powerhouse under the Aldavir Emperor Jabberdrake, and later Sir Centurion. The empire expanded out into many of its neighboring regions, and the General Drakenstein raided an unruly desert ethnic group until they were expelled from the land. But things began to spiral out of control when international pressure was building on Market 55, a large, privately owned store at the center of the world where everyone shopped and looting bandits roamed. The player 55 Tremaine had artificially lowered his prices to monopolize global trade, hurting other nations' market industries. So they called for the market to raise their prices or be dealt with. The Astaleians began to consider forcing 55 Tremaine to hand the market over to them, and hearing of this, he hired the mercenary group Olfang to come and protect it. But right when they were supposed to show up, the group had collapsed from within. Astaleia learned of this contract and gathered a coalition of soldiers to go and take Market 55. 55 Tremaine was able to assemble a squad of bandits who wanted to protect their hunting grounds, and a battle ensued in the market that saw the bandits slaughtered and Market 55 shoppers locked in the basement. Soon 55 Tremaine acquiesced and handed the place over to Astaleia, and their market monopoly was broken. Following the brief emperorship of Iwatomi, Astaleia's golden age rapidly ended with the breakaway province of Yestenbol. The regional overlord Howard had directly supported one side in an international conflict without the approval of the other overlords, and when they tried to hold him accountable, he declared Yestenbol's independence and began raiding into Yimmu Audal's towns. Astaleia attacked Yestenbol, but was defeated. So even though it was just this tiny little province, this loss struck a massive blow to Astaleia's morale and prestige, significantly weakening the empire. The Council of Electors held elections for Emperor between the players Kerplis and Drakenstein, and Kerplis won out because they believed that Drakenstein was too militant and was riling up the population. So only a couple days later, on the Unity Day holiday, Drakenstein launched a military coup and killed Kerplis in a duel. The overlords refused to accept this outcome. Fighting broke out, some of Drakenstein's key military allies were killed, and Astaleia completely fell into balkanized states. Yimmu Audal emerged out of this as its regions negotiated back into a unified High Kingdom. But soon, Howard of Yestenbol threatened to war YA, and the new High King Marshal Yazov and Foxmonk negotiated him down, but they had to give him the capital of Ernu Arak, a huge blow to the tradition-oriented people of Yimmu Audal. After this, they felt like they needed more protection. Luckily for them, Marshal Yazov was also the leader of Asharia, so he united the two under himself as the Soleanin Imperium. The Imperium was deeply wrapped up in tons of international politics, and Marshal Yazov ambitiously grew the empire and the aristocracy around himself. But Yimmu Audal was left alone here to deal with its own problems and chill. Sir Centurion held the position of High King, with Mystic Crafter advising him. The Imperium had a long run of international escapades, but soon it was overcome by its leaders fighting with each other. So some of its military leaders, backed up by a mercenary army called the Hands, went to the Imperium's regions and flipped them to their side, with better deals for representation in the government. So the Imperium collapsed, and the new center of power was Surtaria, on the eastern continent of Sparwood, but the empires were basically doing the same thing. Now within Surtaria, a region of historical YA called Enoshfe was getting a little rowdy. The Enoshphites had long had their own culture and identity going all the way back to the socialist uprising under Dalatra, and their large population was feeling underappreciated and scorned by Yimmu Audal and its successive overlord states. So when newspapers from Enoshfe and Yimmu Audal began trading insults, an order of knights from the city Prisma sparked a nationalist rebellion against Surtaria. But the Surtarians swiftly came in and crushed them with the Hands mercenaries. Soon after, the player Kreziman became emperor and immediately dissolved it because Surtaria didn't have a reason to exist and he had more important stuff to do. Based. So Yimmu Audal was back on the world stage, after about a year and a half of being subsumed by its neighbors. The player Princelet bought Ernuarak back, but Foxmonk denied giving him the official title of patron, so he stormed off and swore that he would help destroy Yimmu Audal. That's called foreshadowing. Yimmu Audal's activity and power slowly started snowballing, and thus we should probably talk about its new emperor, Beagly. One YA member described Beagly to me as perfect. He was active and hands-on in dealing with internal problems. He was popular among his people and was well liked by other nation leaders, especially those in the southwest. With this popularity, he decentralized the empire a bit and made the state step in to positively alleviate people's issues instead of alienating them. He first reinstated YA's old empire status with the vassalization of the Coltmere Islands. He inherited Market 55 from a long line of dudes, which by this time had bounced back from its troubles and was generating boatloads of cash for the empire. He had geopolitical connections to strong mercenary groups. YA clearly had some real diplomatic, financial, and military muscle again. By this time, the old Aldavir region had fallen into dire straits. They'd been fighting for an entire year. In one of these wars, Yimmu Audal had backed the nation of Galadon. Galadon lost and suffered inactivity and depopulation, and in their reconstruction, they became closer to Beagly's Yimmu Audal, so Galadon's King Cassius agreed to integrate as their vassal. The region of Lurgal followed soon after, seeing a lot of potential in YA's stability. Beagly was also able to talk Trev, the leader of the city Cordania, who had earlier seceded from YA with mercenary support, into rejoining the empire. But Beagly eventually abdicated as emperor because he was growing exhausted and King Cassius was always low-key jockeying for power. But him being the most competent successor, he appointed King Cassius as his heir under the condition that he would prioritize Yimmu Audal over Galadon. So when King Cassius ascended the throne, the region of Karn revolted in an attempt to secede from YA and destroy Galadon, being backed by the holy states of Viestin, Azuria, and many mercenaries. Karn had a lot of initial success here, taking swaths of southern territory, but YA marshaled together a proper army, and Karn's leadership fractured from the inside, so the revolt was crushed, and Viestin Saronia was annexed. This revolt was pretty ruthless, traumatizing Yimmu Audal and sowing massive resentment in the defeated leaders of Karn. Despite that, having consolidated its region and quashed all resistance, Yimmu Audal was the world's largest and most active power now, and it stayed that way for around 4 months under King Cassius. His reign had brought Yimmu Audal to the zenith of its size and power. But him being Galadonian was kind of troublesome. Regional sectionalism got more apparent as he came into conflict with the Theonikos and Sironvir regions, as their past conflicts ran deep and he wasn't as active in soothing them. He eventually declared Galadon not a state of the empire, but a vassal so that it would appear on the map, and soon after, he abdicated, appointing Emperor Trev. But just then, old rebellions and animosities would return with a catastrophic vengeance. Let's take another step back and talk about one of YA's other neighbors, Azuria. Azuria and YA had a long roller coaster of a relationship. At times, they were mutually beneficial, with economic and military support for each other. Azuria was first led by a bandit named Dex OG that troubled Delatra's reign. They followed his red cult that was centered in Ernuarak, and they claimed their dynasty to even be a branch of the Audalads. The two were close and pretty similar. But during Beagly's reign, one Azurian leader handed large swaths of Azuria to YA to spite another Azurian leader named Voidfish. The rest of Azuria then fell under the hands of a pirate bandit nation called Charm, which had more Eastern Sparwood influences than YA, and had fallen out with YA's leadership by this point. The provoked Voidfish became hellbent on reunifying Azuria, and it didn't help that when he was trying to negotiate for this, it was the antagonistic King Cassius who was in charge. So Voidfish conspired with the leaders of Charm, those of the old Karn Revolt, Princelet, mercenary allies, and an influential player named Red Dunes. Wait a minute, I know that guy! The gang's all here! They would attack Yimmu Audal to restore Azuria and throw off its grip over the continent. It just so happened that Trev was coronated emperor when they first launched their invasion. The Hands mercenaries attacked the central town of Suckrath, overwhelming its garrison to conquer it, and handing it over to Red Dunes as his duchy of Crimson Den. The attackers then assaulted the strategic town of Rhodia, but Yimmu Audal dug in here and held them off in a battle where they suffered mass casualties. So when Charm assaulted the town a second time, they pushed through the YA defenses and captured it. Yimmu Audal had lost ground to the aggressive coalition. It also turns out that Azuria had made agreements with the northern region Enoshfe, who increasingly resisted YA's influence and just tried to keep the war isolated to the south. So, the YA leaders accepted defeat, signing a peace accord giving them back the Azurian territories, leaving Azuria and Charm as the dominant powers of the Southern Sea. But the real blow here was seeing YA's regions growing further and further apart, and the increasing protests of Enoshfe and Theonikos wanting independence. So, having just exhausted their stockpiles fighting Charm, and these two regions becoming incredibly nationalistic and disconnected from Yimmu Audal's tradition, Emperor Trev didn't see a conciliatory path forward, so he declared the dissolution of Yimmu Audal. The core lands were split into 3 territories. Enoshfe and Theonikos soon united into Eniekos, which inherited Market 55 and was more than ready to stand on its own as a regional power. But the southern core regions of Yimmu Audal and Talor together emerged as the nation of Utari. Yo, shout out to Talor for being the most loyal region to core YA, for real. They tried to establish their own path forward, but only 12 days into the nation, a mayor named MST Megastinker forcefully couped Ernu-Arak, launching Utari into chaos. Towns seceded as their own nations, friend groups were torn apart, outside powers opportunistically intervened, and Trev seceded the Talor region entirely. Well, there goes that. What was left was Eniekos and border gore galore. MST Megastinker later established the Kingdom of Audal and laid claim to the ancient Audalad dynasty, and was able to gain a patchwork territory under his banner. But MST Megastinker was rebuffed by the other leaders, Trev and Ratmeat Jones, who fanned revolutionary flames in the Kingdom of Audal, so they revolted as the state of Yvaidal and also claimed succession to Yimmu Audal. MST Megastinker then sold Ernu-Arak to Eniekos, who replaced the old YA symbols all over the city with their own, enraging the YA leaders who still clung to the old legacy. If this is getting confusing, that's fine. It is confusing. But as several groups jockeyed for the succession of Yimmu Audal to reunify the area, there in the sky appeared Aristor's Comet, a harbinger of the end of the world, and the coming of Play.Stoneworks.gg's new world of Abexilis. This changed things. The fighting stopped, as these scraps of land would soon be frozen over and made desolate. So as the nations were preparing to migrate to the new world of Abexilis, many of the squabbling warlords came together to refound a unified Yimmu Audal together, and until then, it didn't really matter. Charm even launched another invasion into the Balkanized states, hoping to kill Yimmu Audal once and for all, conquering the cities Eldal, Adadi, and Amos, but they didn't really care. When Aristor's Comet passed overhead, the people of Yimmu Audal stepped through their portals, leaving the collapsed empire to be frozen in darkness. When they emerged, they built up their new sandstone capital, Eridu-Arak, meaning Heavenly Hill, in the plains and forests of northwestern Talassi. They elevated Ghastly Bespoke as the new empress, built their throne out of the exact same blocks as the Rathnir throne, and resurrected their ancient culture on the new canvas of Abexilis. Whereas the Eniekos players made the new nation Renosfe down south, so YA could finally be rid of their pesky nationalism. Yimmu Audal has persisted here for a year and a half, and only one word can properly describe it: peaceful. With the coronations of Emperors Ratmeat Jones, Trev, and Border Swimmer, Yimmu Audal has expanded slowly over its region, offered others protection, made a cultural and dynastic history museum, and even joined an anti-communist coalition to bully a communist state into being a vassal. On the 5th anniversary of YA, many of the old Audalad emperors came back online to celebrate 5 years. Take that, Confederate slaver scum. But again, these few things in Abexilis are over a year and a half. They went back and studied the mistakes of their history so they wouldn't repeat them. Now they're the definition of just chilling, and I wouldn't want it any other way for them. So how did a little Minecraft empire and dynasty last 5 real-life years? Core to this is Yimmu Audal's identity, first created by Story Studio way back in Jagdis. For one, the fact that it hopped from Jagdis into Rathnir gave it an air of being ancient and important, but more so the fact that the leading players of this community put a lot of hard work to maintain, develop, and expand their tradition. When the empire wasn't independent, they always kept it alive as a regional and ethnic identity, and the capitals Ernu and Eridu-Arak serve as meccas for a kind of civic religion for its symbols and its history. But they're not such purists or elitists over it that it's inflexible and becomes boring. YA clearly had a lot of influence from its neighbors like Asharia, Theosasukdal, and Aldavir. and you can see how they're willing to change when they migrated to Abexilus, settling in the temperate plains and forests instead of another desert. Many of the same players have been influential here since Mystic Crafter's reign, so there's a constant presence of people who find it important enough to ingrain into the next generation. The world of Rafnir ended with YA, a small state within complete border gore, but people were hellbent on restoring it then, and its players chose to continue it on Abexilus because they cared. In Geopol, they're fine with going to war and crushing rebellions, but they also recognized that it wasn't the worst thing in the world to be isolated to a small region, or be under another empire, even seeking that out sometimes. Most players think that losing a war or the decline and collapse of the nation is the end of the project they put so much love and work into, so they all just give up and quit. But no, giving up is what destroys the project. Yimmu Audal's tradition always stayed alive. YA survived because YA doesn't quit. Play.stoneworks.gg, that's the server IP. Come and make your own nation to make your own history, or even join Yimmu Audal and chill out with them. Thanks for watching.